What's up, everyone? It's Danny Haiphong on this Sunday afternoon. I thought I would begin with a song. I'm going to let some people come on first, though, before I do that. We have a packed hour and a half that I plan to spend with you all. So, not sure if you are here or not, but again, this is Danny Haiphong. Hello for everyone on YouTube. If you're on any other streaming platform, Twitter or Facebook, I do connect this live stream to those platforms. But please do head over to the Left Lens on YouTube and make sure that you drop a like. Make sure that you subscribe by hitting the bell. And for those of you who are here, I'm going to let some people get on the stream, and I'm just going to play a song. It's a Sunday afternoon. It's a chill Sunday. I know there's so many struggles going on right now. I'm going to cover a few very important issues. I'm going to ensure, hey, what's going on? I'm going to ensure that we cover Tibet, that we cover Julian Assange, and that we cover the Dave Chappelle, my take on Dave Chappelle's special. Those two will probably be a little more brief than what I have prepared for Tibet and all of the propaganda that has resurfaced about it. So let's get started. So for those of you who are joining, I see we got some folks from Ireland. What's going on? Hi, good morning. Good morning. For those of you who are behind Eastern time, I'm here at Eastern time zone. So happy Sunday, everyone. If you are joining from any other streaming platform, go to YouTube, The Left Lens. Make sure that you're hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button. Also, this you'll notice, and I'll have announcements later. So please do stay here if you can. But I'm going to be doing this more frequently because I am doing this on a more full-time basis now. And so all of your support is very welcome. And if you can support this channel, support my work, you can do that at Danny Haiphong at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. Please do support independent journalism. With that said, we are going to listen to a short song because I know it takes folks a little bit of time to come in. I'm actually going to see this gentleman, Marlon, who's an incredible hip hop artist. You should check out his work. He's doing some great things out here in New York City. I can't wait to see him. I'm going to get tickets to his show November 27th. I'm not even comfortable with being in big crowds still, but I'm going to do it because I appreciate his works this much. So let's begin, and then we will hold on one second. Before I do this, I just need to make sure that I shared the audio. Hold on one second. Let me do this one more time. Again, drop a like. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And okay, yes, I did share the audio. Okay, here we go. So,
feels like we living in a loop. The cops find black people to kill and shoot. The media just pick which one to give to you. You can't stomach it for a week, and then you poof. I'm tired of these cycles. I ain't much better myself. I can't depend on my health. We all got guts, but mine been through it, so craft hold no punches. This here chin music. A lot of folks can get ruined. I grow my influence, and that's exactly what the kid doing. The shit's growing. Used to need 6 brews to get moving. Now I do some yoga, pleasure my women, and get to it. The audacity of adulthood. They gon' want you stuck where you at. And son, don't do it. The grass was actually greener before they convinced you destroy the land. If the room is toxic, those fans gon' spread the poison, fam. You smell that? Smell like foil plans, whatever they have for me, laugh at me, please. Cause the hero will always die in a tragedy. See, I'd rather be free. Your comments is comedy, you can't shackle with these. What you think the intro, that's the reprise. I laughed them with these. Everything they think they are, I actually be. You uncomfortable? Pass it to me. I'm unapologetic, unabashed, a G. Yeah. So on beat, you think I'm off. Display so much strength, you think I'm soft. I find mine in vulnerability. You find it in the silly, fleeting whims of being tougher for a moment. Feels like we living in a loop. We promote based on cool and conceal the truth. Yeah, and cool is just a substitute for toxic or for corporate profits, I'm being honest. And somebody die and we all cry and scroll the timeline, but our conscience is still on mute. Feel like we living in a loop. Yeah.
All right, guys. So I just want to share that he's one of my favorite hip hop artists out right now. He's doing incredible work. He's a workhorse. He releases something, it seems like every other day. Oh, sorry about that. So yeah, let's get to this now. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you coming out here. For me, Sunday afternoon. For some of you, maybe it's Monday if you're out far on the other side of the planet. Maybe it's the morning for you. Wherever you are, welcome, welcome, welcome. Make sure you like, make sure you share, make sure you subscribe, and make sure, if you can, to support my work at patreon.com/Haiphong. We are going to begin with Tibet. So as you may know, and I will play Marlon Craft. Sorry, everybody. Marlon Craft. Have I not said his name yet? Marlon Craft. Sorry if you came late to the song, but you can, of course, rewind and catch the intro to this stream with an incredible song, The Loop. That's a theme for this stream today because how many decades has it been that we've heard this propaganda about Tibet, right? Tibet is being oppressed by China. Tibet is under dictatorial rule by China. Culture is being wiped away. We saw that playbook kind of rehash itself, reproduce itself in this Uyghur genocide myth, which the last stream was about. So make sure you catch that. But now Tibet is back. And why is it back? Well, I'm going to show you why. I'm actually from Boston, you guys. So, we got in about 90 minutes. So I don't, I feel comfortable going on a little aside. I'm from Boston. I grew up there. I'm a big Celtics fan, big sports fan, mainly Celtics, mainly basketball. And I can just say that Enes Kanter is one of the most frustrating individuals for me on so many levels. So okay, let's just talk about the basketball. He's a terrible basketball player. He can't play. He can't play any defense. He's got some skills on the other end. He can score the ball a little. He's a good offensive rebounder. Terrible, terrible basketball player overall because his defense is just that bad. So he often gets benched a lot. So there's that about Enes Kanter. But this guy now goes viral, and he's been a political person for quite some time. It just went under the radar because the things that he cares about, most of the time, there isn't this broad interest in it amongst the elite. But Fethullah Gulen is his mentor, so he's Turkish, and he considers himself one of these freedom and democracy Turkish neo-Ottomans who was mentored by Fethullah Gulen, a CIA asset, who's in exile in Pennsylvania, is said to have tried to organize a coup against Mr. Erdogan, Tayyip Erdogan. Enes Kanter. Hold on, guys. I'm just going to type in the name of the person who did the song. But yeah, Mr. Erdogan is, he's a repressive agent of imperialism. I mean, we know that. Turkey sponsors terrorism in Syria, is all about intervention, supports, really wants to be part of NATO. Really wants to be part of the EU, is already a participant in NATO. So, Turkey is, its current leadership is not something to rave about, but the CIA supports Fethullah Gulen, who is even more fascistic in many ways, wants to turn Turkey into a complete client state, which Turkey isn't right now. Turkey has some independent foreign policy objectives and whatnot, but that's where Enes Kanter is. And so he made headlines recently by commenting on the issue of Tibet. I guess a day later, he came out on the Uyghur genocide issue. Predictable. Who would have thought that someone who is so rapacious and so ignorant about Tibet and so willing to sell themselves to peddle State Department propaganda would embrace the whole anti-China spectrum? So with that said, I want to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So for those who maybe missed this, I'll show you what Mr. Enes Kanter did, and then we will talk about Tibet. I have Michael Parenti's article on friendly feudalism, which we will review, and I have some other materials as well to just show you how ridiculous it is that Tibet is not only resurfacing, but continues to be a talking point of imperialism against China. So first, let's go to this Enes Kanter debacle. So there he is. Let's watch his Free Tibet video that went viral. The New York Times covered it.
My message to the Chinese government is free Tibet. Tibet belongs to Tibetans. I'm here to add my voice and speak out about what is happening in Tibet. Under the Chinese government's brutal rule, Tibetan people's basic rights and freedoms are non-existent. They are not allowed to study and learn their language and culture freely. They are not allowed to travel freely. They are not allowed to access information freely. The Tibetan people are not even allowed to worship freely. For more than 70 years, Tibetan monks, nuns, intellectuals, writers, poets, community leaders, activists, and many more have been detained, sent to political re-education classes, subject to torture, lengthy interrogations, and even been executed simply for exercising the freedom that you and I take for granted. There have been more than 5,000 political prisoners in Tibet the last 25 years. 5,000.
Okay. So I can't go through that whole thing. I actually didn't watch the whole thing, but he's reading a script. He immediately got advertisements from the Free Tibet Student Movement Incorporated. Literally, it's incorporated, funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, and everything he said there is just complete propaganda. Mr. Enes Kanter, right, is literally just reading off of a script. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. He said there's been 5,000 prisoners, political prisoners. Well, the United States has more than 2 million prisoners, and depending on what your definition of political is, you could say that there are certainly 2 million political prisoners in the United States if we do believe that there is a political and economic motivation to that. But he doesn't cite any evidence, and we shouldn't have expected him to. So that's what got him a lot of notoriety in the corporate media. China actually banned the Boston Celtics. Tencent Corporation actually banned the Boston Celtics in China, so they can't be played. They're terrible this year, so it really is probably no skin off the back of the Chinese people. They're not fun to watch, and he barely plays anyway. So it's not like someone who people in China are gonna miss out on. But it's a very sensitive issue, and there's a big reason why, and it's because Tibet and the liberation of Tibet, which began in 1951 peacefully, right after the Chinese Revolution, China, the People's Republic of China, led by the Communist Party, led a peaceful transition of power from KMT rule, nationalist rule, which allowed the landlords there, the Lama class, who hailed Dalai Lama. You saw it on his shirt, on Enes Kanter's shirt. That class of landlords, brutal, feudal, destructive landlords, parasitic, just abusive and oppressive and violent. They were allowed to continue to rule so long as they respected certain reforms of land, certain rights to the peasantry, etc. But the lamas could not accept this, and so they waged violent campaigns to resist the People's Republic of China's wishes. And in 1959, it came to a head, and there was a so-called revolt of the lamas. They were suppressed and they were driven out. and Tibet was completely liberated in 1959, and it was a glorious day for the people who live in Tibet. And it was also a huge victory for the Chinese Revolution, because it allowed that region, this western part of China, to accelerate in its development. And we've seen so many achievements since then. So I want to share something from Friends of Socialist China to kind of underscore the basic facts of the situation that we publish. I co-edit Friends of Socialist China, by the way. And so I'm going to share that. But while I'm doing that, of course, drop a like if you're just coming on to this stream. Also, make sure that you share, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And I'm going to sort of review this graphic that we made. So Tibet's already free. That is the conclusion that we made at Friends of Socialist China. That is not an opinion. I believe that is a fact. So, we responded to Enes Kanter's free Tibet sentiment. He had T-shirts and shoes or something ridiculous. New York Times covered it. And so here we go. But here's the graphic. And I want to just read what Tibet was like under Lama rule and what Tibet is like today. And we'll get into a longer article by Michael Parenti, who I was so humbled that he gave a blurb to my book. And his work, a Marxist scholar, academic, he has been very influential on my political development. So we're going to get into that, even though I don't agree with everything in the article, but we may or may not read the whole thing. But anyway, here it is, the graphic. All right. So Tibet under Lama rule. So before 1951, Tibet was characterized by brutal serfdom. There was an enormous population of homeless people. Malnutrition was endemic. The poor were denied the right to education. 95% of the population was illiterate. 95%. So that basically means anyone who was not a landlord was illiterate. Brutal punishment were exacted by local authorities under the Dalai Lama for any transgressions against the ruling elite. Serfs and slaves had their hands or feet chopped off. Yes, that is correct. Hands or feet chopped off, their eyes gouged out even, for petty offenses in defiance of feudal customs. This is the paradise that imperialist powers want Tibet to go back to. And then Tibet today. So Tibet has been transformed. We go a good friend, Jingjing Li, CGTN. She's traveled there. Daniel Dumbrill, who next week I'm going to be collaborating with on his channel, have traveled there. There's been news coming out of the high-speed rail that's built there now to connect Tibet to the rest of the country. Extreme poverty in 2019 was eradicated, but here we go. Tibet has been transformed after the Chinese Revolution and the overthrow of feudalism. Land was distributed to the peasantry and serfdom was abolished. So serfdom was abolished. There was no more landlord class after the full liberation in 1959. Schools, hospitals, and railways were built, and illiteracy was eradicated. Everyone can read now in Tibet. And that's not a minor thing. I think even though in the United States, reading is a very taken for granted thing, most people in the United States cannot read beyond a 5th grade level, which to me, that means illiterate in the context of U.S. development. But if you are unable to read, then your oppression is that much more likely, especially by those ruling elites, depending on what system you live under, feudalism, capitalism. Your inability to read will inevitably lead to some of the harshest forms of oppression, and that has been true since the beginning of the struggle for socialism and for the struggle against feudalism and capitalism all across the world. So to continue school, people have access to what are considered globally as key human rights like land, food, education, healthcare, modern, clean energy. As I said before, high-speed rail is a big part of this. Clean water, housing, clothing. Tibetan culture is protected and celebrated. That might sound shocking that Tibetan culture is protected and celebrated. But if you've, actually been there, you've seen those who have been there, you can see that monasteries as relics are actually protected. that although Mandarin is taught inside of schools as a primary language of the nation, the language of the people in this region, Tibet, the Tibet Autonomous Region, they are also respected. And there's more, and it's not just Tibetan, not just the native language of Tibetans, but it's also all the languages that are spoken, because there are multiple languages in any region in China, any region anywhere, but any region in China, there's multiple languages, and they are protected in the sense that they're allowed to speak it at home. They continue to speak it in the schools, in the workplaces. So the Free Tibet campaign celebrates brutal feudalism and supports an ongoing 72-year-old imperialist strategy to weaken China and roll back its revolution. So those are just some key summary points, okay? Key summary points of Tibet. And we'll get into a longer article now, but for those who are joining the stream, of course, like it, share it, make sure that you drop a like, and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And if you can, support me at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong to make this independent journalism more sustainable. You might notice that I am doing this more. I'm relaunching next week, Internationalist Transmission. So thanks everyone who already does support my work, and let's continue. So with that said, I mean, this is just an enduring theme, right? Free Tibet, and it's gonna happen again with the Beijing 2022 Olympics, right? There's going to be a confluence of this propaganda, this US-led propaganda war against China. All the talking points are going to resurface, even though there's been some hesitation from, especially the Biden administration, from whether to embrace these at a real concrete level. But whether it's Taiwan, whether we're talking about Xinjiang, whether we're talking about Tibet, these are all going to come up again as the Beijing Olympics happen, because those Olympic Games are going to be a real show of progress in a lot of ways. In most countries, having Olympic Games there is a show of poverty and the destitution and the exploitation. But in China, because its social system is different, and because of all the achievements that have led up to Beijing 2022, it will be a real show of advancement for China. And that means the United States will be very nervous about that and will look to hit on things like Tibet again. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing this narrative reemerge. With that said, though, let's get to Friendly Feudalism by Michael Parenti, because I do want to try to end this stream by 3:30, and this is a little bit of a long article. So if you're willing, make sure you stick with me here. We're going to read, comment, and it should be good, because this is one of the, I think, the best articles for people in the United States and the West to read, to learn about this history. So let's do this. And actually, Mike, something's wrong with Michael Parenti's website. Maybe it's just me, but I had to actually take this from another website, Red Sales, which is a really good source as well. So let's do this. Here we go. So there it is. All right. So we'll just read through this. Hopefully we can get through this in the next 20-30 minutes with some commentary in between. This was an article I had read years ago by Michael Parenti, which was deeply influential in starting to shift my opinions of China, even though I'll say I've changed my opinions of his assessment here. And this is old. This is, I think, 2007. So this is an old assessment of China, and I don't agree with his conclusions about China's economy, but nonetheless, here we go. Let's read this. I'm actually going to zoom in a little because my laptop's a little far. I hope that's okay with you. Let's see how it's going with you all. All right. I hope that's all right. Hope you can see this. So there's some contents here, and we're going to start for Lords and Lamas. All right. So Michael Parenti says, along with the blood-drenched landscape of religious conflict, there is the experience of inner peace and solace that every religion promises, no more so than Buddhism. Standing in marked contrast to the intolerant savagery of other religions, Buddhism is neither fanatical nor dogmatic, so say its adherents. For many of them, Buddhism is less a theology and more meditative and investigative discipline intended to promote inner harmony and enlightenment while directing us to a path of right living. Generally, the spiritual focus is not only on oneself, but also on the welfare of others. One tries to put aside egoistic pursuits and gain a deeper understanding of one's connections to all peoples and things. Socially engaged Buddhism tries to blend individual liberation with responsible social action in order to build an enlightened society. A glance at history, however, reveals that not all the many and widely varying forms of Buddhism have been free of doctrinal fanaticism, nor free of the violent, exploitative pursuits of other so-called so characteristics of other religions. In Sri Lanka, there is a legendary and almost sacred recorded history about the triumphant battles waged by Buddhist kings of yore. During the 20th century, Buddhists clashed violently with each other with non-Buddhists in Thailand, Burma, Korea, Japan, India, and elsewhere. In Sri Lanka, armed battles between Buddhist Sinhalese and Hindu Tamils have taken many lives on both sides. In 1998, the U.S. Department of State listed 30 of the world's most violent and dangerous extremist groups. Over half of them were religious, specifically Muslim, Jewish, and Buddhist. In South Korea in 1998, thousands of monks of the Chongye Buddhist order fought each other with fists, rock fires, bombs, clubs, in pitched battles that went on for weeks. They were vying for control of the order, the largest in South Korea, with its annual budget of $9.2 million. Its millions of dollars worth of property, and the privilege of appointing 1,700 monks to various offices. The brawls damaged the main Buddhist sanctuaries and left dozens of monks injured, some seriously. The Korean public appeared to disdain both factions, feeling that no matter what side took control, quote, it would use worshippers' donations for luxurious houses and expensive cars, end quote. As with any religion, squabbles between or within Buddhist sects are often fueled by the material corruption and personal deficiencies of the leadership. For example, in Nagano, Japan, at Zenkoji, the prestigious complex of temples that has hosted Buddhist sects for more than 1,400 years, quote, a nasty battle arose between Kamatsu, the chief priest, and Tachu, a group of temples nominally under the chief's priest's sway. The Tachu monks accused Kamatsu of selling writings and drawings under the temple's name for his own gain. They also were appalled by the frequency with which he was seen in the company of women. Kamatsu, in turn, sought to isolate and punish monks who were critical of his leadership. The conflict lasted 5 years and made it to the courts. But what of Tibetan Buddhism? Is it not an exception to this sort of strife? And what of the society it helped to create? Many Buddhists maintain that before the Chinese crackdown in 1959, Old Tibet was a spiritually oriented kingdom free of egoistic lifestyles, empty materialism, and corrupting vices that beset modern industrialized societies. Western news media, travel books, novels, and Hollywood films have portrayed the Tibetan theocracy as a veritable Shangri-La. The Dalai Lama himself stated that, quote, the pervasive influence of Buddhism, end quote, in Tibet amid the wide open spaces of an unspoiled environment resulted in a society dedicated to peace and harmony. We enjoyed freedom and contentment. So I'm going to stop there, guys, because I don't know about you all, but I grew up in Boston, as I said. And in Boston, not only is there Boston area, especially Cambridge and some of the areas with a little bit more higher incomes, there's a Tibetan population, and there's also a white liberal population that loves, and this is characteristic of white liberals, quote unquote white leftists. They love Tibet. They love the Free Tibet movement. They love everything about this fantasy of Buddhism, this Buddhist fantasy of, this is like a spiritual way of living. It really is a way for them to escape their culpability and imperialism and make themselves feel better about oppression, that they can point over there as, look at these peaceful people who have been so repressed by that other so-called quote unquote dictatorship, and we should follow them because that allows us to avert our gaze from the atrocities that we are complicit in committing. So I cannot stand that phenomenon. I just wanted to say that because everything he said up to here and kind of making this connection that religions are really based on, he says, leadership, yes, but also on the political economy from which these religions emerge, right? I'm a Marxist. I believe that ideas come from our material conditions. That's how we formulate ideas, how we experience the world. So if you live under a feudal society, which a lot of these religions emerge from, then those ideas end up reproducing those social relations. And I think this is kind of tried and tested throughout history in terms of its correctness. So anyway, to continue, a reading of Tibet's history suggests a somewhat different picture. Religious conflict was commonplace in Old Tibet, writes one Western Buddhist practitioner. History belies the Shangri-La image of Tibetan lamas and their followers living together in mutual tolerance and nonviolent goodwill. Indeed, the situation was quite different. Old Tibet was much more like Europe during the religious wars of the Counter-Reformation. In the 13th century, Emperor Kublai Khan created the first Grand Lama, who was to preside over all the other lamas as might a pope over his bishops. Several centuries later, the Emperor of China sent an army into Tibet to support the Grand Lama, an ambitious 25-year-old man who then gave himself the title of Dalai, Ocean Lama, ruler of all of Tibet. His two previous Lama incarnations were then retroactively recognized by his predecessors, thereby transforming the first Dalai Lama into the third Dalai Lama. This first or third Dalai Lama seized monasteries that did not belong to his sect and is believed to have destroyed Buddhist writings that conflicted with his claim to divinity. The Dalai Lama who succeeded him pursued a sybaritic life, enjoying many mistresses, partying with friends, and acting in other ways deemed unfitting for an incarnate deity. For these transgressions, he was murdered by his priests. Within 170 years, despite their recognized divine status, 5 Dalai Lamas were killed by their high priests or other courtiers. For hundreds of years, competing Tibetan Buddhist sects engaged in bitterly violent clashes and summary executions. In 1660, the 5th Dalai Lama was faced with a rebellion in the Sang province, the stronghold of the rival Kagyu sect with its high lama known as Karmapa. The 5th Dalai Lama called for harsh retribution against rebels, directing the Mongol army to obliterate the male and female lines, and the offspring too, like eggs smashed against rock. In short, annihilate any traces of them, even their names. In 1792, many Kagyu monasteries were confiscated and their monks were forcibly converted to the Gulag sect, the Dalai Lama's denomination. The Gulag school, known as the Yellow Hats, showed little tolerance or willingness to mix their teachings with other Buddhist sects. In other words, in the words of one of their traditional prayers, "Praise to you, violent God of the Yellow Hats teaching, who reduces the particles of dust, great beings, high officials, and ordinary people who pollute and corrupt the Gulag doctrine." An 18th century memoir of a Tibetan general depicts sectarian strife among Buddhists that is An 18th century memoir of a Tibetan general depicts sectarian strife among Buddhists that is as brutal and bloody as any religious conflict might be. This grim history remains largely unvisited by present-day followers of Tibetan Buddhism in the West. I just want to make one quick comment before we continue going on. In China, when I was there, we went to Donghuang, and there's this huge Buddha kind of statue in the desert, and there we learned about some of this brutality of feudalism, right? This isn't something that's peppered over in China. Now, there's a lot of respect shown still to Buddhists and those who practice Buddhism. So we were unable to take pictures of these maintained sites, right? These maintained relics of ancient Buddhism and whatnot. But there's all this talk about concubines and about the ways in which these sort of feudal overlords committed these kind of atrocities and abuses. And so it's important to put that in perspective when we're talking. We can't, this sort of fetishizing of the past really does make for some really, really damaging explanations for certain things, and it builds support for what really is archaic and backwards ways of life that should be eradicated. Not the practice, but the material conditions from which this practice has been used to justify. So Religions have had a close relationship with not only violence, but with economic exploitation. Indeed, it is often the economic exploitation that necessitates the violence. Case in point. So such was the case with the Tibetan theocracy. Until 1959, when the Dalai Lama presided over Tibet, most of the arable land was still organized into manorial estates worked by serfs. These estates were owned by two social groups, the rich secular landlords and the rich theocratic lamas. Even a writer sympathetic to the old order allows that, quote, a great deal of real estate belonged to the monasteries, and most of them amassed great riches. Much of the wealth was accumulated through active participation in trade, commerce, and money lending. Drepung Monastery was one of the biggest landowners in the world, with its 185 manors, 25,000 serfs, 300 great pastures, and 16,000 herdsmen. The wealth of the monasteries rested in the hands of a small number of high-ranking lamas. Most ordinary monks lived modestly and had no direct access to great wealth. The Dalai Lama himself lived richly in the 1,000-room, 14-story Patola Palace. Secular leaders also did well. A notable example is the commander-in-chief of the Tibetan army, a member of the Dalai Lama's lay cabinet, who owned 4,000 square kilometers of land and 3,500 serfs. Old Tibet has been misrepresented by some Western admirers as a nation that required no police because its people voluntarily observed the laws of karma. In fact, it had a professional army, albeit a small one, that served mainly as a gendarmerie for the landlords to keep order, protect their private property, and hunt down runaway serfs. Young Tibetan boys were regularly taken from their peasant families and brought into the monasteries to be trained as monks. Once they were there, they were bonded for life. Tashi Sering, a monk, reports that it was common for peasant children to be sexually mistreated in the monasteries. He himself was a victim of repeated rape beginning at the age of 9. The monastic estates also conscripted children for lifelong servitude as domestics, dance performers, and soldiers. In Old Tibet, there were a small number of farmers who subsisted as a kind of free peasantry, and perhaps an additional 10,000 people who composed the middle-class families of merchants, shopkeepers, and small traders. Thousands of others were beggars. There were also slaves, usually domestic servants who owned nothing. Their offspring were born into slavery. The majority of the rural population were serfs. Treated little better than slaves, the serfs went without schooling or medical care. They were under a lifetime bond to work the Lord's land, or the monastery's land, without pay to repair the Lord's houses, transport his crops, and collect his firewood. They were also expected to provide carrying animals and transportation on demand. Their masters told them what crops to grow and what animals to raise. They could not get married without consent of their lord or lama, and they might easily be separated from their families should their owners lease them out to work in a distant location. So he's going into great detail, okay? And I think we get the picture. This was Old Tibet, all right? This is a very repressive, feudalistic social order where a tiny minority of landlords oppressed the vast majority of serfs, stripped them of their rights to literacy, their rights to housing, their rights to survive, their right to have food, education. All of that was denied, and it was a brutal social order. So, he continues to go on. He talks about the sexual slavery, that the girls were just slaves without rights under this order. Landowners had the legal authority to capture those who tried to flee. One 24-year-old runaway welcomed the Chinese intervention as liberation. He testified that under serfdom, he was subjected to incessant toil, hunger, and cold. And after his third failed escape, he was mercilessly beaten by the landlord's men until blood poured from his nose and mouth. They then poured alcohol and caustic soda on his wounds to increase the pain. So this is torture. I mean, this is what existed at this time. And as I said, there was violence, right? There was this extreme violence, these reprisals, this corporal punishment, taking limbs, gouging eyes. I mean, so, here we go. So, he's talking about this example, a former serf, Tessera Wang, Tui, who had stolen 2 sheep belonging to a monastery, this is what he went through. He had both of his eyes gouged out and his hand mutilated beyond use. He explained he is no longer a Buddhist. When a holy lama told them to blind me, I thought there was no good in religion. Since it was against Buddhist teachings to take a human life, some offenders were severely lashed and left to God in freezing night to die. The parallels between Tibet and medieval Europe are striking, concludes Tom Grunfeld in his book on Tibet. So that's all I think you need to know. I mean, we can go on and on and on about the despotism of this social order, okay? So for those who are new here, all right, we're talking about hypocrisy, about the U.S. propaganda on Tibet, Enes Kanter, and we're going over Michael Parenti's article, Friendly Feudalism, The Myth of Tibet. You can find this link in the description. Please do like the stream. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And if you can, subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. Now we're going back to it. I'm going to try to get this done in the next 10 minutes, guys. So he's going to go now into what happened to Tibet after the Chinese communists moved into the country in 1951. All right, this is key. The treaty of that year provided ostensible self-governance, as I said, right, under the Dalai Lama's rule, but gave China military control and exclusive right to conduct foreign relations. The Chinese were also granted a direct role in internal administration to promote social reforms, as I had said before. Among the earliest changes they wrought was to reduce usurious interest rates and build a few hospitals and roads. At first, they moved slowly, relying mostly on persuasion in an attempt to effect reconstruction. No aristocratic or monastic property was confiscated, and feudal lords continued to reign over their hereditarily bound peasants. Contrary to popular belief in the West, claims one observer, the Chinese took care to show respect for Tibetan culture and religion. This is during the Mao period, guys. This is during the period when the Communist Party of China, Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, they were beginning socialist reconstruction. This is the height of the Cold War, height of anti-communism. And here we have Michael Parenti showing us that, in fact, even then, China, under the leadership of the CPC, was doing everything it could to respect the cultural order of this particular region and used persuasion more so than violence or repression or any kind of coercion to try to affect real social change. So this is how deep the propaganda goes, is that now we're talking about Xinjiang all the time, right? Xinjiang. What makes Xinjiang of 2021 different from Tibet then, right? The difference is that not only has China modernized and has been able to advance socialism to an even greater degree, but Xinjiang has been integrated in Chinese society for many, many, many centuries and decades now under socialism. And things have been able to correct themselves in terms of some of these more backward elements that really existed in Xinjiang for so many years, were exploited by the ETIM to wage terrorist attacks and to create a proxy war environment. So this propaganda is so damaging because it really does not only belie reality, but it promotes the foreign policy, the imperialist objectives of the American empire. And so I think that's why it's always important to go over these facts. Over the centuries, the Tibetan lords and lamas had seen the Chinese come and go and had enjoyed good relations with Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek and his reactionary KMT rule in China. The approval of the KMT government was needed to validate the choice of the Dalai Lama and Panchen Lama. When the current 14th Dalai Lama was first installed in Lhasa, it was with an armed escort of Chinese troops and an attending Chinese minister in accordance with centuries-old tradition. What upset the Tibetan lords and lamas in the early 1950s was that these Chinese were communists. It would only be a matter of time, they feared, before the communists started imposing collectivist egalitarian schemes upon Tibet. The horror. The issue was joined in 56 and 57 when armed Tibetan bands ambushed convoys of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. The uprising received extensive assistance from the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, including military training, support camps in Nepal, and numerous airlifts. Meanwhile, in the United States, the American Society for Free Asia, a CIA-financed front, energetically publicized the cause of Tibetan resistance, with the Dalai Lama's eldest brother, Tubdan Norbu, playing active role in that organization. The Dalai Lama's second eldest brother, Gyalo Thondrup, established an intelligence operation with the CIA as early as 1951. He later upgraded it into a CIA military CIA trained guerrilla unit whose recruits parachuted back to Tibet. Many Tibetan commandos and agents whom the CIA dropped into the country were chiefs of aristocratic clans or sons of chiefs. 90% of them were never heard from again, according to a report by the CIA itself, meaning that they were most likely captured and killed. Many lamas and lay members of the elite and much of the Tibetan army joined the uprising, but in the main, the populace did not, assuring its failure. This is huge. In their book on Tibet, Ginsburg and Mathos reach a similar conclusion. As far as can be ascertained, the great bulk of the common people of Lhasa and of the adjoining countryside failed to join in the fighting against the Chinese, both when it first began and as it progressed. Eventually, the resistance crumbled. So this is a big fact. All of this propaganda about Tibet represents a tiny minority of the population, everyone. A tiny minority of the population. The CIA attempted to organize recruits from this Lama class, from this landlord class, in order to break China apart, in order to destroy its revolution. And it failed mightily because, on the one hand, you had a revolution, a socialist revolution, but also a national liberation movement that was seeking to shake off underdevelopment, poverty, and imperialism from abroad, imperialist interference. And then you had the other alternative, which was to remain subjugated to this brutal, feudalistic, backward social order, which was literally chopping limbs, leaving people to freeze, legalizing pedophilia, all of these disgusting instances of a semi-feudal social order that existed in this part of China at that time. It was only backed up by a minority of the population, the landlord class, and they were backed by the Central Intelligence Agency. And that's where all this comes from. And that's why I said that Enes Kanter is literally CIA, because he, from his connections to Fethullah Gulen, from his championing of Israel, from his parroting Uyghur genocide tropes, and now Tibet tropes, he is literally doing the work of the Central Intelligence Agency. So let's continue for a little bit more, but we're only going to do a couple more minutes of this, okay? So whatever wrongs and new oppressions introduced by the Chinese, see, I don't like that, but after 1951, but we'll go keep going. They did abolish slavery, and the Tibetan serfdom system of unpaid labor. They eliminated the many crushing taxes, started work projects, and greatly reduced unemployment and beggary. They established secular schools, thereby breaking the education monopoly of the monasteries. And they constructed running water and electrical systems in Lhasa. Sounds like a pretty good deal. Heinrich Harrier, later revealed to have been a sergeant in Hitler's SS, wrote a bestseller about his experiences in Tibet that was made into a popular Hollywood movie. He reported that the Tibetans who resisted the Chinese were predominantly nobles, semi-nobles, and lamas. They were punished by being made to perform the lowliest tasks, such as laboring on roads and bridges. They were further humiliated by being made to clean up the city before the tourists arrived. They also had to live in a camp originally reserved for beggars and vagrants, all of which Harrier treats as sure evidence of the dreadful nature of the Chinese occupation. I think that's what we need to do. I think that's that if we are going to have, and this is why we need to learn from history, because although we are not in the Chinese context, although this is not 1959 People's Republic of China, we are in 2021, the United States, there's a lesson here that power is authoritarian. You need to have some authoritarianism. It's all about where that authoritarianism goes. And I know there are a lot of people on the left who say, oh, no, you can't use that word. Oh, no. Well, I think that it is correct. As any workers' movement, any socialist movement, any movement for revolution has to be authoritarian towards their class enemies, because not only, even if they are usurpative power, not this not only does this class, whether we're talking about the capitalist here or the feudal landlord class there in China decades ago, or the capitalist class now, they have power, they have connections. They'll have those connections even when they're taken out of power. So you must assert a level of authoritarianism, a level of power over them. That is why I'm a socialist, and I believe that the first function of a socialist state is to ensure that this kind of class that we are talking about right now cannot have state power, cannot have the ability to determine the living conditions, the working conditions, the conditions of society as they had before. So that's why the ruling class uses this term authoritarianism. That's why China, Cuba, all the socialist countries are demonized, because that's what they do. They disallow, they create conditions when you cannot have this class control things. And even though China has a capitalist class, so to speak, there are capitalists in China, they are not allowed to dictate state power, because the Communist Party of China is a check on them. And it's a much bigger check on them than the so-called Nordic states. It is a check that ensures that their interests cannot be galvanized by the state, that the state cannot be taken over by their interests. And so that's why we see things like this common prosperity agenda in China, which is now moving towards ensuring that this development that is making some rich, it is making some people rich, that those rich are not able to then do things like Alibaba Group was trying to do, which was to level inordinate amounts of debt onto people through certain financial schemes, right? That was eliminated, eradicated, and that's why you heard all these weird things about Jack Ma disappearing. He doesn't even own Alibaba Group anymore, but nonetheless, that's just one policy that shows that the legacy of socialism continues in China. So let's continue for a little bit longer. So by 1961, Chinese occupation authorities expropriated the landed estates owned by lords and lamas. They distributed many thousands of acres of tenant farmers and landless peasants, reorganizing them into hundreds of communes. Herds once owned by nobility were turned over to collectives of poor shepherds. Improvements were made in the breeding of livestock, and new varieties of vegetables and new strains of wheat and barley were introduced, along with irrigation improvements, all of which reportedly led to an increase in agrarian production. Many peasants remained as religious as ever, giving alms to the clergy, but monks who had been conscripted as children into the religious order were now free to renounce their monastic life, and thousands did, especially the younger ones. The remaining clergy lived on modest government stipends and extra income earned by officiating at prayer services, weddings, and funerals. Both the Dalai Lama and his advisor and youngest brother, Tenzin Choigual, claim that more than 1.2 million Tibetans are dead as a result of the Chinese occupation. The official 1953 census, 6 years before the Chinese crackdown, recorded the entire population residing in Tibet at 1,274,000. Other census counts pulled the population within Tibet at about 2 million. The Chinese killed 1.2 million in the early 1960s, and almost all of Tibet would have been depopulated, transformed to a killing field dotted with death camps and mass graves, of which we have no evidence. The thinly distributed Chinese forces in Tibet could not have rounded up, hunted down, and exterminated that many people, even if they had spent all its time doing nothing else. So, I think this is important, okay? And I think I'm going to stop here with the article because I think we covered good grounds. Maybe we can go into a little bit about the intervention in 1959 that he talks about. But I just want to say that, what does that sound like? This population, using these high claims of mass killings by this Communist Party of China. It sounds like the Uyghur situation. It sounds like Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, the Xinjiang province, which the United States cannot stop talking about. And they make the same claims, right? 2 million have been put into camps. 2 million have been victims of genocide, yet the population of the Uyghurs in China has actually risen quite a bit over the last several decades. Actually, it has risen many more times over in comparison to the so-called majority Han population in China. And so you see the loop, right? The song by Low Key, he talks about the loop. This is the loop that we continue to see over and over and over again. The propaganda really does play as a loop by the U.S. imperialist ruling class in order to justify what they were doing here, for example, right, using the CIA, or now with the National Endowment for Democracy doing what the CIA does in secret in public. This is all part of the agenda to try to undermine China, try to undermine all alternative forms of governance, all alternatives to imperialism, and to try to recruit liberals, to try to recruit neoliberals, right? Because that's where the NED really places its attention. That's where the CIA places a lot of its attention. Abroad, they place a lot of their attention on the fanatical far right, whether we're talking about Eastern Europe or whether Ukraine. But in the United States, the attention of intelligence agencies right now is on the liberal class because, first of all, the far right doesn't really need convincing to hate China. They already have popular figureheads, but it's how do you build this consensus among those who are politically active in the United States and those who are donors, right? The big donor class, the capitalist class, especially the military contractors, they love to see this, and they all work together to ensure that there's an environment, an atmosphere that primes the population to support not only the U.S., the U.S.'s dirty wars abroad, and this was one of them. This is a dirty war, guys. What the United States did in Tibet was a dirty war. So we're talking about we're talking about 1959 now. Okay, so this was the intervention this is a revolt led by landlords in 1959, and it was an unmitigated calamity for the landlords and the rich lamas. Most of them fled abroad, like the Dalai Lama, who was assisted in his flight by the CIA. Some discovered to their horror that they would have to work for a living. Many, however, escaped that fate. Throughout the 1960s, the Tibetan exile community was secretly pocketing $1.7 million a year from the CIA, according to documents released by the State Department in 1998. All right. Once this fact was publicized, the Dalai Lama's organization itself issued a statement admitting that it received millions of dollars from the CIA during the 1960s to send armed squads of exiles into Tibet to undermine the Maoist revolution. The Dalai Lama's annual payment from the CIA was $186,000. Indian intelligence also financed both him and Tibetan exiles. He has refused to say whether his brothers work for the CIA, and the Central Intelligence Agency has also refused to comment. In 1995, the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina, carried footage of color photography of the Dalai Lama being embraced by the reactionary Republican Senator Jesse Helms under the headline, "Buddhist Captivates Hero of Religious Right." In April 1999, along with Margaret Thatcher, Pope John Paul II, and the first George Bush, the Dalai Lama called upon the British government to release Augusto Pinochet, the former fascist dictator of Chile and a longtime CIA client who was visiting England. The Dalai Lama urged that Pinochet not be forced to go to Spain, where he was wanted to stand trial for crimes against humanity. Into the 21st century, via the National Endowment for Democracy and other conduits that are responsible for more respectable sounding than the CIA, the U.S. Congress continued to allocate annually $2 million to Tibetans in India, with additional millions for democracy activities with the Tibetan exile community. In addition, the Dalai Lama receives money from financier George Soros. So I'm going to leave it there. Let's leave that article there because we're getting to 3 p.m. now. And I think that's a lot of information, helpful information. You can read the rest of the article, and I encourage you all to do so. The link is in the description. But stay with me because we have a couple of topics I want to hit on and announcements. For those who have just come or maybe have not done so yet, please like the stream. Please make sure to subscribe to The Left Lens, this YouTube channel. And if you can, as I'm doing this more on a full-time basis, I would really appreciate if you could support my independent journalism at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong, and you can see it right here. And the link is in the description. So there you have it. The Dalai Lama, friends of Augusto Pinochet. The Dalai Lama was paid by the CIA to wage a dirty war against the Chinese Revolution as they moved in 1959 to liberate Tibet. They failed incredibly. I mean, it was a failure, and it was a huge victory for China. And it was honestly a huge victory for the world movement, for the world socialist movement, because these kind of backward conditions, which the United States continues to support elsewhere. I mean, look at how the United States is militarizing the African continent, for example. What do you think that does to the ability of the African people, no matter where they are, to chart a course out of poverty and out of the uh, enormous amounts of debt that the U.S. and Western financial institutions continue to oppose on these countries? Militarizing the African continent has uh, ultimately helped keep the African continent backwards, when now there's an option, a really decent trade partner out there, and that's China. And that's what's happening. That's the war over Africa, right? That they talk about, the so-called scramble, this new scramble. It's not a scramble at all. It's about the United States and the West keeping Africa in a state of colonial dependency. You have 14 West African states that continue to have their currency completely controlled by the French colonial powers. We saw what happened in Guinea, Mali, all over the African continent. The colonial powers continue to interfere in the self-determination of these African nations. And as I said in the last stream, Libya was a huge part of that. And these connections are really important to make, because when you have an example like a Libya, like a China, the U.S. imperialist propaganda apparatus, which includes the National Endowment for Democracy and all of its attendant institutions and similar institutions, they go into overdrive to essentially build and manufacture consent for these wars. And it's not always effective, but even when it's not effective in terms of changing people's opinions, it creates an atmosphere from which people do not have an alternative. And so they don't take any action. So if we're not taking any action, if we're not actively countering these lies, if we're not actively studying the truth of the matter with regard to Tibet, then we ultimately are not doing our part and can't do our part to ensure that these kind of interventions and dirty wars cannot happen again. And I think right now we're at this very critical juncture in world politics where the United States has this very paradoxical approach to China. It continues to believe that it can just exploit China economically, while at the same time demonize its social system and economic system and attempt to wage this very counterproductive new Cold War in order to overturn the political trajectory of China. It's not working. We even heard Vladimir Putin recently tell the world that the capitalist order has really run its course, right? This is Vladimir Putin. He's not a communist, right? Vladimir Putin is definitely not a communist. The United Russia Party is not a communist party. But even governments abroad that are not run by communist parties, cannot be called socialist to any degree, they are seeing that China represents an alternative. They are seeing that the United States has nothing to offer humanity. And so these narratives, these humanitarian interventionist narratives, these propaganda narratives only serve to give the bully of the United States, the bully that is the United States, this veneer of progressivism, of concern for human rights, when no such thing is the case. It's the opposite. The United States would love to see Tibet back into this feudalistic social order that was so repressive and disgustingly torturous to the population, just as the United States would love to see Xinjiang once again mired in terrorist attacks, mired in chaos. They would love to see more Urumqi riots, 2014, 2009. They'd love to see more of that violence. And that should be a huge red flag, right? The United States is not happy that there is all of this economic development happening in Xinjiang, Tibet, in all of these poor Chinese provinces. That is not what the United States wants to see. The United States wants to expand its influence, wants to expand its hegemony, and it will make up any racist, imperialist epithet about these tropes about China, about all countries, right? Because we have to connect this to Syria, to connect this to Venezuela, to Cuba, all of these anti-communist, racist tropes about dictators and authoritarianism. That's what they want. That's what they continue to do so they can get what they want, right? And we have to be steadfast in saying, no, you can't get what you want. And this Kanter he's just a dupe. He's a real dupe. We're called dupes of Russia, dupes of China, dupes of socialism. He's a real dupe of imperialism because he's getting paid millions, right? His basketball career has already paid him millions, and he's going to get millions more. He's with Fatullah Gulen. That guy is made man, right? He was on the payroll. So Enes Kanter, he's a made man by the establishment, by the foreign policy establishment. But yet it's us who's called dupes of Russia, China, Syria, whatever, Assadis, all this nonsense. It's all to deflect from the facts. And so we have the white liberal class, the liberal class in general. We have the neoliberals and the neoconservatives in this alliance together to push this kind of propaganda. And so that is really my summary on Tibet. And so I hope that was helpful for all of you. I'm going to stay on. I still got another 30 plus minutes because there are a couple of other topics that I wanted to get to. There are some other links that I put in there. I'm not going to get to them because the Parenti article was long. So you can go into the description and find links to the 1998 article in the LA Times that reported some of the things that Parenti said about the CIA. You can also find a great article by Esha over at Historically. I hope to have Esha on this program very soon as it can happen. And there'll be more announcements later in the program. But she has a great article on Tibet. I think it's one of the best summaries because unlike Michael Parenti's article, which is immensely long, this one can be read in a relatively short amount of time. And then there's another article in there, perhaps, about I wrote a piece about Rudy Gobert because he's another one of these NBA players who, this is about a year and a half ago, I believe it was, a little over a year ago, Rudy Gobert came out for the Uyghur trope, this Uyghur narrative, and lambasted China. And there was this article in ESPN that kind of hyped up the Xinjiang issue. And so I wrote about it because, I think it's so important. These celebrities, right? They're not our friends. They are forces who can be easily manipulated because of their privileged position. And so it is always amazing and incredible when people like the WNBA players, right, who went out on strike, the NBA players who went on strike last year to support Black Lives Matter, or we're talking about Colin Kaepernick. It's incredible when these athletes can kind of break the chains, at least to a certain extent, to really highlight important things. But we also have someone like Rudy Gobert, someone like Enes Kanter, who, they come from these kind of privileged, bourgeois, international backgrounds. They come make millions of dollars here in the USA playing basketball, and they use their platform to project imperialist propaganda because ultimately the best way to profit off of the international situation right now is to get on board the State Department train and ride it as long as you can. So Rudy Gobert did that, and I think I left the article in the description as it's kind of a similar counter in writing to what I did here. So let's move on. Julian Assange. I want to share, actually, there's a great event today. So everyone who's here while I'm putting up this event, it's a tweet by Lee Camp, friend of the show, Lee Camp. I am going to put that up, but since you're here, make sure that you like this stream and subscribe if you haven't done so, and also support me on Patreon if you're able. So let me just find this. Here we go. Okay. So today, Lee Camp is going to be joined by Cornel West, Roger Waters, and a Stand Up for Assange event with Katie Halper. Margaret Kimberly will also be there. Black Agenda Report, Randy Credico, so many folks. Jaffer Khan, Margaret Kunstler, the great Margaret Kunstler, So here's the link. I believe I put it in the description as well. So make sure you go to that event, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So, you got a few hours to go. And I want to talk about Julian Assange because it's very connected to what we're talking about here, this propaganda. So imperialist propaganda is effective when there isn't an alternative, an accessible alternative. The left, the anti-imperialist left in the United States, is in such a dire state. So the reason why I'm trying to launch a program about internationalism, the reason why you always hear me talk about it, I can talk about a lot of things, guys. In Black Agenda Report, if you can find my articles, unfortunately the website has some issues that still need figuring out, but I've written a couple hundred articles, and I can tell you there's a good amount of those that aren't about, most of them are about imperialism, but there's a lot of commentary on domestic political situation. I did a 10-part series on the Obama era. I've covered domestic politics that a lot of progressives talk about now, right? Healthcare, education, the exploitation of workers, all of this is so important. But the reason why I focus on anti-imperialism is because there's a huge gap here. It's not because I privilege it over. I see it as intimately connected to the domestic situation. And so what's going on with Julian Assange is I think, an example of this deep connection between imperialism abroad and imperialism at home. Julian Assange is being punished. He's being repressed. He is on the verge of being killed, right? There is a real attempt to kill him. We saw the Yahoo report. There was an attempt for the CIA to assassinate him or kidnap him or whatnot. And this had already been known. The gray zone had already exposed that was in the works. And Julian Assange is attacked because of what WikiLeaks and his role there, his leadership there in exposing war crimes and exposing the connection, right? So Julian Assange has played a huge role in moving the United States, a lot of the population in the West, in a less warmongering direction. His ability to expose their ability to expose these crimes and to do it through primary source material that was given to them, that was leaked to them. This is just journalism 101, what they've done, and yet he is being attacked for it. It's because, and for a very good reason, right? We say, oh, it's terrible and he shouldn't be. Of course he should not be punished, but we know why he is being punished. We know why the United States is going on. It's 3 days out until this dubious and completely fraudulent appeal hearing that the United States is having to try to extradite Assange after the UK courts refused to do so. This is a war on truth. This is a war on all of us who hope and seek to promote information that counters imperialist propaganda. So that's the connection here, is that the United States' general population has become, since Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have been repressed by the US government, it has actually become more war-like. It has become more primed for war. And of course, China is a big part of this, Russia as well. And this transition from the war on terror to the great power competition has played a huge role in this. And of course, there are many other factors. But one huge one is that Julian Assange is in prison, and WikiLeaks has been weakened a lot, right? Its capacity has shrunk a lot because of this pressure campaign, this repression campaign led by the United States to not only extradite Assange, but to destroy WikiLeaks, to destroy that kind of journalism generally. And that is a huge reason why we see these numbers, such as more than half of poll respondents are now saying that they would support a U.S. military intervention in Taiwan or against China, or that public opinion of China is dropping. And that's because the corporate media has the monopoly now. It always had, but now WikiLeaks is going through so much torture and terror by the U.S. government, and we have to stand up for Assange because that's what's at stake here. We want to see Assange live. We want to see Julian Assange live. Of course we do. And we want all political prisoners free. And please do check out my article on Black Agenda Report, where I talk about the connection between political prisoners and Julian Assange. But we also understand that this is a lot bigger than Julian Assange. And I know Julian Assange and his supporters understand this as well. They understand that this is not just about some amorphous free speech. Of course, it's about our capacity to tell the truth and to not be punished for that. That, of course, I guess you could say is an issue of free speech. But American exceptionalism's idea of free speech was always fraudulent. It's never existed in the United States. It's only that in this modern period, in this last 40 plus years, we can go even further back than that, that there have been encroachments on the free speech of everybody, not just selected groups for oppression, right? Not just those who anger the establishment. Now it's anyone who is attempting to expose these crimes is now subject to some level of this kind of repression. And that's because the empire is desperate. The empire is in crisis. The empire cannot continue to go on as it always had. And so Julian Assange represents a thorn in the side of the empire. And so, we need to support Julian Assange. So go to that event, find out how you can do that. I also promoted in my last Black Agenda Report article one that the People's Forum held a couple of days ago, Friday. So you can check that out on the People's Forum YouTube channel. But do check out this evening's event with Margaret Kimberly and so many good folks being streamed on YouTube. The link, I think it's to Lee Camp's tweet, is in the description. But we must free Julian Assange. His work must be defended. The work of WikiLeaks must be defended. Their ability to expose U.S. war crimes in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere, as well as U.S. political corruption of the Democratic Party, which I believe is the real reason that he is being attacked. That and the fact that WikiLeaks also exposed the CIA's hacking capabilities in Vault 7 documents. All of this forms the reason why Julian Assange is not being given any breaks from the establishment. And so it really will be up to popular pressure to force Joe Biden to do the right thing, something Joe Biden never does, right? Joe Biden is a war criminal. He's an establishment figure. He is someone he's a neoliberal, he's a neocon, he's an imperialist, and we cannot expect that he will defend Julian Assange, because he certainly didn't do that under Barack Obama when they were secretly trying to nab Assange as well. Even though they were talking about, it was a different period, so there was much more pressure because these were Bush crimes, the war crimes issues. There's a lot of pressure to protect Assange at that time. But the situation has changed after 8 years of Obama and Donald Trump, and the ways in which the corporate media and the establishment coalesced together to try to connect Assange with Trump and Russia. That propaganda has led us to a moment where the United States is the only country in the world that thinks Assange is a criminal and that thinks that WikiLeaks is a criminal entity, and that has to change. And that is the effectiveness of war propaganda. That is the link between what the United States says and does with regard to China and what the United States says and does with regard to Julian Assange. So do go to that event. That is my position on the matter. Free Julian Assange, everybody. And we're going to close actually with Dave Chappelle. So, I'm going to comment on this. I don't really comment that much. As I said before, I've been focusing a lot on imperialism, a lot on war, a lot on China, a lot on socialism. I'm relaunching this YouTube show, the Internationalist Transmission, and in a few minutes I'll make sure that you have your announcements. Hey, what's up? Big Teal is here. He's a frequent streamer. What's going on, guys? Make sure to rewind if you've just come in. So, Dave Chappelle, let's talk about it. So, yeah, Dave Chappelle to me, he's funny. I'm not a huge consumer of comedy. I'm a funny. I like to laugh. I'm a very serious guy on these things, but I have taste and I like to chill. And Dave Chappelle, he's got some good stuff. The Chappelle Show was fine. I didn't really watch it when I was young, but all my friends did, and I eventually watched it, and I thought it was decent. He's a funny guy. He's got some talent. But Dave Chappelle has been doing what a lot of people are doing now. And this is what I want to say about Dave Chappelle. There's a couple of things that no one is really touching on. One, okay. In this conversation about gender oppression, transphobia, homophobia, rarely is class taken into account. And Dave Chappelle repeated this error, so he definitely is guilty of this. But his detractors are also very guilty of this. So, Dave Chappelle has kind of been working the clicks, right? He understands that there's a lot of animosity towards wokeism and especially woke liberalism. This kind of, some people call it identity politics. I think it's just reductionism, right? This political reductionism of so-called identity. It's really corporate feminism, corporate gender politics. There's a lot of animosity towards this because, on the one hand, there's been a huge shift to the right among a certain section of the US population, especially the white population. But then again, there's also been a polarization to the left, and people want to talk about class, they want to talk about power, they want to talk about oppression. And so these corporate liberals, the liberal class, they've attempted to drive a wedge, right? They've sat in between this wedge, dominance, they're really the dominant class, and have simultaneously suppressed the left while stoking the right with these very watered down version of politics in regards to gender and race. And so it's important to connect, okay? What neither Dave Chappelle, who is trying to get clicks and popularity among both the left and the right, he's really appealing to this animosity towards liberals. And it's a very understandable animosity. I share the animosity. But the way that Dave Chappelle is framing things ends up becoming problematic because the question of how transgender people are treated in this country, the question of sexism or any kind of gender oppression or oppression based on sexuality it's not intersectionality. It is deeply embedded in the power structure of the society, in the political economy of the United States, meaning that trans people in the United States, especially Black trans people, they do go through some of the most severe forms of class oppression, race oppression, exploitation. And it's important that we raise this because what Dave Chappelle unfortunately did, which got him a lot of notoriety, which is what he wanted, but he veiled his very correct critique about white liberalism in a more universalistic language, meaning that he was saying that this wide spectrum of politics among trans people ultimately can be reduced to how white liberals and how the white liberal class has co-opted the politics of struggle among transgender people and among anyone who is fighting oppression of any kind based on gender and sexuality as merely a white thing. And he could have been very specific, but he didn't want to because that would have, one, not been as exciting, not have created so many gasps among the liberals or among all viewers, right? So he didn't do that. He didn't do it purposefully because there's a model here, guys. The Joe Rogan model, he's a libertarian. Dave Chappelle, we don't really know politically where he stands, but we know that he has anti-establishment leanings. And so it is both profitable and also very convenient for Dave Chappelle to, of course, use this universalist language to describe a very specific phenomenon. And I don't disagree with his frustrations with the mainstream LGBTQIA plus movement, which has money behind it, is being embraced more so by the ruling class as acceptable because it has it has formed a core around elites and ultimately left all Black people, all exploited people, all oppressed people out, including Black trans people, including Black people, people of queer identified people, all people who are facing the immense destruction of this capitalist juggernaut, of this empire in decline. They are left out. They are the ones who lose from the co-optation of trans politics into the mainstream. But at the same time, we know that you've got to be specific when you're speaking politically about things. So he's a comedian. He's trying to make some money. And I can't say I disagree with some of his points, but overall, the way he went about it was not the way that we revolutionaries go about things, or we progressives or leftists. We need to have serious conversations about the neoliberal co-optation of quote unquote identity politics, the ways in which the ruling class uses a race-only framework or a gender-only framework to repress class interests. But we also have to be very serious about talking about how a lot of those who, especially among liberals or so-called social democrats, Bernie people do this a lot, Jacobin, whatever. We also have to be very careful about class-only politics, because class is not merely whether you work in a factory or not, right? Class oppression is about your relationship to production, and racism, gender. These things do play a central role in that, in where you reside in the United States or anywhere else under an imperialist capitalist regime, where you stand. I mean, there's a reason why Black people get paid, half the wages, right? They get paid 60 cents, 65, 70 cents to every dollar of a white worker. That is in aggregate the truth of the matter. Unemployment tends to be twice as high for Black people, right? Trans people tend to die more, tend to be more homeless than people who don't identify as transgender. That's the fact among those folks who are experiencing the day-to-day transgressions of this system. The ruling class, the Caitlyn Jenners or whoever they are, we're talking about a different phenomenon. We're talking about an attempt to normalize, which isn't necessarily the worst thing, to normalize trans identity, but also to do so with the goal of reinforcing the class interests of the society, which is a bad thing, right? So we have to be very nuanced, and Dave Chappelle just wasn't as nuanced, as I would have liked as a revolutionary. But look, Dave Chappelle is not a revolutionary. These celebrities are not revolutionaries. I agreed with some of the things he said about in the last two specials he's done. I've agreed with his overall, not his overall approach, but his specific criticism of this mainstream, mainly white LGBTQIA plus movement. I totally have been there. I've experienced this when I was in college. It's a big problem, and it's very racist. And Dave Chappelle has every right to bring up the racism inherent in these movements that do see Black men such as himself as problems. But he's not necessarily doing that. And he's going with the Joe Rogan model is, if I can own the libs and I can get clicks, I can get, he knows this is business, guys. All right. So we also have to remember that these things, if people want to talk about this, it's just like, there are these issues that these celebrities are talking about. And it's on one hand, they think this or they think that. It's not just about what people think. We live first through the material conditions of the society. And Chappelle is a business. He himself is a business. So he is looking at where the winds are blowing, what is marketable, what is going to get him here on the streaming services the most views, what's going to get him more social media hits, what's going to get him more notoriety among the tabloid press, right? That's an element to this, and we have to understand that. All right. And so it's important to remember this, and to remember that we need to have always the poor, always the oppressed, always the exploited, always the workers at heart. And we have to understand that these so-called cultural issues have class manifestations, have manifestations within within our day-to-day lives that must be discussed. We have to have solidarity in mind. It's not that hard, I think that in this period with the Trump phenomenon, everyone thinks everyone who supports Trump is working class. No one who supports Clinton is working class. All this stuff. People think class is political ideology, but it's not. And so if you think that just Trump supporters are working class, then you're an idiot, because you don't understand what class is. Class is a relationship. It's a social relationship. It's a relationship to production. And we can't just be pandering to people depending on what side of the political spectrum within the two-party duopoly they support, whether they're liberals or conservatives, whatever. No, most people are not anywhere. Most people are on so many different sides of all kinds of issues because they're not engaged in class struggle. So it's our job to have solidarity in mind, to engage these issues with sensitivity, approachability, with a willingness to discuss the contradictions, always willing to discuss the contradictions, the many sides to these phenomena. The fact that trans people, yes, there is oppression of trans people, there is exploitation, there is more poverty, there is more racism in some ways, there is more within the experience of many trans people. And then there's also the other side, those who have money, who are looking to mainstream it, who are looking to get comfortable positions in the Defense Department, within military contractors, become executives of major corporations. Those are the forces we always need to watch out for because they exist. All right. But we need to have solidarity in mind with those of our class, the workers, the oppressed, right? And that means we can't just say, oh, it's not a working class issue. What trans people are doing, that's not a working. It is, because whether you talk about the healthcare system or the prison system, there's a lot of issues that will be class struggle issues. And so that's where we need to be moving toward. We need to be able to have these conversations. And we need to always combat the toxicity of this like academic bourgeois, petty bourgeois, liberal class, which only wants to promote its brand in order to ensure that it continues to receive the spoils of imperialism. And so that's my position. My position is we need to be able to see the whole picture. And Dave Chappelle and his detractors, neither of them do. At least there are things I agree with when it comes to Dave Chappelle. I agree less with his detractors because many of them are acting in bad faith. They're not interested in this wider view among the elites. But there are some people out there who legitimately are angry because they do see trans politics. They do see a struggle among trans people, among queer people, among people who do not identify within the mainstream gender narrative. They see, they see their issues as class issues, and they see their issues as ones that should be included in any kind of class struggle. And I can't deny that. I can't deny that of anybody, right? Because if we are going to have a successful revolutionary struggle, we're going to have to unite together among so many different lines. And we're going to have to struggle out where we disagree. So if we disagree, then we disagree. And we have to have struggle around that so we can move forward. So in any event, that's my opinion on Mr. Dave Chappelle. I do think that he has a lot, he has a lot of talent. He has a lot to give. And, good friend John Jeter wrote a really good article about comparing him to Richard Pryor. And while I agree with the basic premise that Richard Pryor did a similar thing with the white gay community, where he called them out and said, look, you're racist toward me, so I can't support you. I totally get that, and I agree with that basic premise. But Dave Chappelle has a little bit, I think, of a bigger contradiction that needs to be dealt with, in the sense that he was being intentionally. He's not a dummy. He's a smart guy, very intelligent. He was intentionally obfuscating his own point to try to make more money and try to get the masses riled up, and that inevitably did a disservice to him, because not only did it immobilize his detractors, but it also gave them so much ammo to be able to label him as anti-trans, when his basic point could have been forwarded in a much more effective way, and we could be having a much better conversation about gender and politics and class struggle. With that said, we can't rely on celebrities to do this. And I think we do this too much on these platforms and everywhere. We're hoping that a celebrity will tell us the truth about something, and then we'll be like, oh, yes, that's it. No. These issues will be resolved in the streets, in the movements, through real political struggle. And so we got to wage that against the enemies, whether they're, it's the neoliberals co-opting gender politics for their own selfish and narrow interests, whether it's people like Barack Obama, the Black misleadership class, which are trying to sanitize and ultimately destroy the legacy of the Black liberation movement, whether it's the overall class struggle, where you see so many of these interpretations of working class, the Trump supporters are working class. No, it's the Democrats that are working class. All of this nonsense to obfuscate from the fact that actually both parties are anti-working class. And if you're a Trump supporter and believe that Trump is in your working class, then you are a confused person, right? You believe Trump's fighting for the working class and you're working class, then you're confused. You could be racist. You could be both. The same thing goes with Democrats. If you supported that, if you're the Democrats, you're like, the Democrats are champions of the working class. Well, you could be confused. You could be racist. You could be all of the above. But that is not what this is about. What this is about is countering the propaganda. Our job is to counter the propaganda, to fight in a way that builds solidarity with the capacity to have real conversations, right? We should have a real conversation about gender, a real conversation about white supremacy. We have to, because they are integral parts of class society. We cannot just ignore them and say, oh, that's liberal, right? No. Liberals they're not these all powerful beings. They responded to social movements of the past in an attempt to re-legitimize themselves. Now we have to do what we got to do, which is build real class struggle, a real movement of oppressed people, of poor people, seeking to really take down this nightmarish system and build a new one. All right. So that's my opinion of this matter. So it's about 3:38. I've been on for nearly an hour and 40 minutes. Thank you all who came to the stream today. Before I go, please do. I may take a look at this chat. This is some extra time here. Please do like this stream. Please do subscribe to the channel. And before I get to the announcements, please, if you can, I am now in my first week of being free from a 9-to-5 job. I'm planning some interesting things for the international transmission, and I'm doing some collaboration work. I'll get to the announcements in a second, but nonetheless, I'm relying on readers, supporters, followers for my income now. So if you have the capacity, please do subscribe to my Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. And that would be greatly appreciated. So with the announcements now, before I get to some of these chats, I don't want to see what you guys are saying. The transgender question, gender, it always gets people all hot. So announcements first. I am trying to have Low Key, UK rapper, political analyst, activist, as my first guest for the International Transmission. We're trying to work out the scheduling. I have a few other feelers out there that I don't really want to say until they answer me. So he may be the first. Hopefully, he will be the first. He's agreed, and so we're just working out times. But he will be one of the first guests of the International Transmission, and so you want to keep a lookout for that. I'll make sure that I announce that. He's an incredible rapper, guys. Check out his music. Soundtrack to the Struggle is a beautiful album, one of my favorite albums of all time. So Low Key, Soundtrack to the Struggle. There's one song in particular that I want to go over with him that had an immense influence on me for listening to it, just emotionally, politically, called Children of the Diaspora. So we'll do some of that, and we'll just have a good talk. He's over at Mint Press News now, doing some really good work. He's a wealth of knowledge. Dude is really smart. He's participated in a few no Cold War events talking about China. He's kind of an encyclopedic mind, and I look forward to that. So hopefully in the next week that will have happened. All right. So I'm working on that. So the International Transmission is getting going, and with this time and with your financial support, this is how I'm able to do this work. My colleague Carlos Martinez over at Friends of Socialist China and I are also collaborating on an article about the difference between socialist democracy and capitalist democracy for the Academy of Marxism in China. So it's a very exciting opportunity for both of us. He's a very dear friend and comrade. Hope to have him also on this show. Hope to have him do some work with me at Friends of Socialist China YouTube page, maybe do some podcasting there. But we're co-writing an article, and that's going to be more in November when it's done and hopefully published by then. And it should make the rounds in Chinese media. So, okay. So last announcement. I'm going to be collaborating with Daniel Dumbrill on his channel. So next week that'll happen, and maybe we'll work out something for mine as well. He is an expat. He lives in, he's a Canadian. He lives in, for those who aren't familiar, he lives in Shenzhen. He's a very astute thinker. He's participated in Friends of Socialist China events. He is raising children in China. He is someone with a lot of knowledge about China. So it should be a fun conversation. He really began with fighting this propaganda about Hong Kong and exposing the real roots of that movement. And so it should be a great conversation. So look out for that. That should happen next week. I think it's going to happen Thursday evening. So, but yeah, no, you can follow all of my work at patreon.com/Danny Haiphong. And we can get to the chat now for a little bit. I can get 5 minutes. Somebody said that the chat was wilding out, and so I gotta look at. I don't know if I can look at all these guys. It's been a long talk. Let's see if there's. Okay. There might be some folks on here. Let's see. Okay, I'll just start from here. Fighting transgenderism is capitalist deflection from actually making social change. Get people off the streets and see them give a. Fighting transgenderism is capitalist deflection for actually making social change to get people off the street and get them to give us jobs. Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that, I totally agree with the fact that if you're going to oppose transgender people's rights to live how they want to live, to deflect from real class issues, and I agree with that. I do think they're interconnected, though. So we can't deny that there is, especially if you live in the big cities, because this is a more of an issue here, more visible. Those who are homeless, disproportionately, those trans folks in these areas, especially where I am in New York City, homelessness tends to be very disproportionate experience for them. for so many reasons. There's a rampant discrimination that happens both on the job, seeking employment, so many things based on how transgender people are perceived, and we gotta be real about that, guys. This is not a lie. This is totally, that's a fact. Let's see. Anything else that I want to comment on here? So Big Teal says the issue isn't one's gender identity, it's the contradictions of capital that includes class disparity and one of its many issues. Yes. Yeah, it's true. It's not like we should not be. I don't identify as trans, I don't. That's not my experience, but I have many comrades who do, and I gotta respect them. And there's a lot of racism tinged to this. On the one hand, you have a lot of vicious racists who are so pro-establishment, who hate trans people because they hold on to this very conservative idea of gender and family. And then there's this other side, like Black Lives Matter Network, the Global Network Foundation, where they've used the language of solidarity with Black trans people, Black queer folks, as a way to say, well, those heterosexual straight Black men, those heterosexual Black men who may not be trans, are a problem. And I think that's also equally and that. I mean, to me, that can be very harmful, because it belies some of the data that Black men tend to be even more open to gender equality than other racial groups, especially men. But it also, pits people against each other and doesn't look at concrete issues. I think we have to always have a sight for who the enemy is. We can't be the enemy if we're making the enemy within ourselves publicly. If we're saying, all Black men are anti-trans, right? Then we are creating a favorable situation for the ruling class. So yeah, it seems like a lot of people are somebody said I'm asserting speech authority over a comedian here. I don't know if they're referring to me or someone else in the chat. I'm just gonna say that's kind of wild. I definitely wasn't doing that. I have the right to say whatever the hell I want about Dave Chappelle's comedy. If he wanted to, I think I have the right to say that he could have been smarter about how he went about this. Might not have been as funny. Sure, you're a comedian, do your thing, but comedy is a reflection of politics, just like anything else, and we have the right to criticize it if we want. And we also have the right to agree. Like, I had some agreements with some of his criticisms, but I just thought he's intentionally trying to make money by obfuscating what is an important point, and also hitting on real issues among trans and queer and other folks that are going to engender that kind of reaction that he got. And some of that reaction that he got was legitimate. And there are many people who I respect who believe that. All right, so this person, obviously, they're saying something about China, whatever. Okay. So, yeah, there's some nonsense here in the chat. So thanks all for coming. I think, this is going to be continue to be a contested issue. I appreciate all of your assistance, all of your support. One thing about this transgender issue, and I'll just close here, is that the United States likes to pretend that it's somehow more socially progressive than other countries, right? The United States says that it is more advanced when it comes to gender, or more advanced when it comes to race than other countries. It even tries to say that, like, Cuba, a country that had a socialist revolution and liberated Afro-Cubans from the scourge of colonial and neo-colonial oppression, that somehow Cuba is more racist than the United States, even though Cuba has nothing like a mass Black incarceration system. It is nothing like a police force that kills 1,000 people per year. 25% of those tend to be Black Americans. It does not have anything like the inequality economically, politically that exists among Black and white people in the United States. But Cuba, right, or China with its so-called oppression of ethnic minorities. China not only has fewer than half of the prisoners that the United States has, but China has a more robust affirmative action system when it comes to Uyghur ethnic minorities, whoever we're talking about. Any non-Han population has rights that go beyond actually what the Han majority has, in order to ensure that they are able to catch up, because there is a historical legacy of inequality among ethnic minorities from prior eras of Chinese history. So that myth is part of American exceptionalism. And it negates some of these real concrete class issues that we're talking about. In Cuba and even in Iran, you can get sexual reassignment surgery, right? Sex reassignment surgery, gender reassignment surgery for free. You can get that for free because it is your right to have that kind of healthcare. Now, ideologically, I can't speak for Iran. I know in Cuba, ideologically, Cuba has moved ahead of the United States on these issues. I went to a Senesex rally in Havana, Cuba, when I was there in 2016, 17, I think it was. 2016, I was there, summer of 2016, and I attended a rally of Senesex, the Center of Sexual Education in Cuba. And there was an incredible rally for trans people. There were trans Black Cubans dancing in the streets, no police. There was a real feeling of liberation at that party, at that street party, at that like literal parade party in the streets that I had never felt here in any struggle around these issues or any other. So with that said, I think it's important to remember that the United States is actually quite backwards on these issues, and that there is no exceptionalism on this question. Things like what happened with Dave Chappelle expose the fact that there is still not only a lot of ideological backwardness on these questions, but also there is this debate happening among the left, which reflects a lot of this issue, a lot of these issues. It reflects the fact that it's hard for the left, which does not have organization, which does not have even an independent media sphere, which is willing to openly talk about these things in a way that may not garner clicks and likes, that it's hard to be what we are, or I am at least as a Marxist, a dialectical materialist, that there are contradictions that we need to address, and that we cannot be pitting certain contradictions against each other when they don't necessarily go against each other, right? Like the rights of trans people are not anti-working class in and of themselves. We need to be very concrete about our analysis. Dave Chappelle was not concrete, and ultimately a lot of his detractors fall into a different but very equally, if not more so, problematic stance of reducing trans rights as bourgeois rights. These aren't bourgeois rights. These are working class struggles, guys. The struggle against racism, the struggle against any kind of gender oppression, the struggle against any kind of oppression at all is always at its core a class struggle. And now we have to then discern which class is struggling. All right. And so when it comes to the Jenners of the world, Caitlyn Jenners, when it comes to these bourgeois feminists, these Western feminists, they're struggling for rich people and the rights of rich people. Well, we need to be struggling for the rights of poor people, of working class people. And that does not mean we need to fall into social conservatism. It means that we need to be able to organize in a way where we can move with people, regardless of whether we disagree with them or not on certain issues, while at the same time struggling within in a manner that helps move all of us forward. Okay? So that is my conclusion on this issue and of this stream. It was wonderful to be with you all today on what is a Sunday afternoon for me. I will be back with the internationalist transmission, probably more so. Margaret and I will probably schedule another Left Lens at some point. And again, if you're still here, make sure you like, subscribe to the channel, like the stream. Make sure that if you can support me on patreon.com/DannyHaiphong, that you kindly do so, because it will definitely help me continue on this path to becoming more independent and being able to sustain this work in the long term and put the time into it that it deserves. That's what this whole move was about. And so with this free time, I'm going to continue to work, get out anti-imperialist, socialist, revolutionary material for all of you. And I hope that you enjoyed today's stream. Take good care, everyone. All power to the people. And I will see you again very soon. Bye-bye.